sense of by Monday, next Monday, when we're done with purpose, does anyone here have the topic of purpose? Okay. You're not going to know what college you need to go to, what degree you should do, what job you need to do. This is not like a college-ready, aptitude test, right? It's not that easy. But what it does is we're starting a couple steps back to say, okay, that stuff that we'll talk about in society and a couple other different topics, remember, we're still dealing with us as people. Because what we really need to do is to figure out not why do I exist in the sense of what do I want to do with my life, like my existence there, right? But why do I exist in the sense of right now, as you guys are sitting here and you are breathing and blinking and your heart is pumping, what is your existence about? Why are you living right now? Right? That's a great question. That's usually the response that we get is well, I have no idea. That's what we're going to get to. Because this whole topic revolves around the concept of worship and love. Purpose is directly related to what you worship and what you love. Finding out why you exist, why you're living and breathing, is directly related to what you see as greatest. We'll talk way more about that tomorrow. But today what we're going to do is just begin this conversation by starting with the foundational idea of how do we even know that we have a purpose or that we need a purpose, let alone need to find our purpose, let alone what that thing is. So the idea is that yesterday or last week we started with this concept of longing, right? Duality of man, being self-aware of it, produces longing, centered on a transcendent, it reveals a transcendent reality centered on a personal being, right? God, stuff like that. But basically what we said is that when we engage with our longing, there are three responses that we have, and they all differ. Number one, or one of the responses, is distraction or diversion. This will be up here for a while, so this might be worth drawing out in your notes. Just as a little heads up. I fixed it! Sorry. Okay. Anything technology, I'm so proud. Yes. Yes. We'll talk about that in a second. Don't get ahead of me. Okay. Distraction, right? So Pascal talks about the need for diversion because we see our wretchedness and we don't want to think about it, so we binge Netflix. We see the possibility of greatness that we might be able to attain, and we get terrified and we lack courage, so we go on a drive to distract ourselves. Not really to think about it, but to see the sights, right? It's stuff like that. That's diversion and distraction. The other one is despair. This is what we talked about as the gloomy cynicism of life in general, right? Of life in general. And it is a pure apathy, a cynicism. It is seeing the issues at hand, seeing our nature, wanting to engage with it, but at the end of the day, just not caring because of whatever reason, and going into the corner, sitting down, putting your arms over your knees, curling up into the fetal position, and rocking back and forth. Because it's just this pure apathy, pure cynicism, nothing will ever be great, and it's whatever. That is not a great place to be in. That is the bottom of the barrel. But the goal of what we talked about last week, and we kind of put into the words of the object of our longing being God, is that once we realize that we are longing beings, we have a pursuit of the transcendent. This is really what we ended with last time. When we see that we are... It's Lewis, right? When we see that nothing in this world satisfies, where do we look for satisfaction? It has to be outside of this world. It has to mean that if nothing in this world satisfies me, I was meant for another world. That's what we mean by this idea of transcendent, okay? Something outside of this world. If we have an infinite longing, then the only response is that there needs to be something infinite that can satisfy it. That's why we kind of talked about God as being the object. Not just the Christian language, but it aligns with our experience. So these are the three responses that we have. We didn't talk about this language. I didn't use this language last week, but I'm giving you this language now to connect with the ideas that we talked about last week. Does that make sense? Cool. So that is essentially what we talked about last week. Now, before we even move forward in talking about purpose, we have to talk about something else that comes even before this. Because if this is us, we have a blank face because we're not happy, we're not sad, we're just existing. Before we can even engage with our longing, or before we are even conscious of our nature as longing, there's something else that clouds that. This guy named Josef Pieper wrote an essay in 1952 called Learning How to See Again. And he refers to this thing that keeps us from engaging with our nature, and he calls it visual noise. The definition that he gives is that it is tawdry, empty stimuli. Tawdry, empty stimuli. Now, really quickly, let me give you an example of this just to get your mind thinking about it. Then I want to create a distinction between two things, and then we can talk about this a little bit more. So, visual noise is tawdry, empty stimuli that just exists, that we don't seek out as a distraction, but it just exists, and it's there to fog our sight, right? That's why this bubble is over the head. It's a terrible drawing, I apologize, but it's there because it's something like driving in a fog. We can't see in front of us, and we've got to sift through it all. This is the age in which we exist. Pieper says it this way. He says, we do not think about our condition because we just don't become aware of it. We don't think about our condition because there is too much at our fingertips for us to see. So this is not a physical sight. It is a visual noise. Is something that keeps us from seeing the spirituality of life, from seeing that there's something more significant going on even in our own condition. So here's an example. Flappy Bird. If you guys, I assume that you guys from that response have played this game before. It was popular a long time ago, 5-6 years ago, right? It's the cell phone game where you tap and you have to bring the bird up and down and bring them through pipes. Every time you go under a pipe, it goes bing, bing, bing as you go. Tawdry, which really just means flippant, non-essential, right? Empty, totally vain and totally insubstantial. Stimuli, still something that gets the heart rate going, right? It does nothing to help get us to this point. But what it does is whenever we try, say if we suffer and we try to ask these questions, it's not that we seek distraction, it's that there's so much for us to see that we can't even move beyond those things to begin to ask those questions. Because there's so much else calling to us like a siren song, right? That's the thing that I want to distinguish. This is not distraction, though Flappy Bird 100% could be a distraction. But for it to be a distraction requires that we even begin to think about and engage with our nature, that duality of man, right? Our wretchedness, our greatness, and then not want to engage with it, want to not think about it. What this is saying is that visual noise exists before we even get a chance to think about who we are, because it is all around us. Does that distinction make sense? Okay. So, in your life, think of this. What are other examples of Flappy Bird for you? Other examples of visual noise. Let's put some flesh on this for you guys sitting there. Probably your first time ever hearing this word. There are a couple that are it's improper to say that this could be anything because it is not. Tawdry, empty stimuli is very specific. But I think that there are a couple really key examples that you might just not want to say because of whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So here's the question, though, that can illustrate that. What is it that's about TikTok that is empty? Yes. No, that's great. When we talk about beauty, is anyone here in faith and art? I mean, you've taken it before. Yeah. Did you guys just talk about visual noise today? Okay. When we get into talking about beauty, we'll talk about the difference between what is just purely entertaining and what is like true art. What is, yeah, what is like, what is the thing that we use to just like check out and become mindless, like zombies and just consume. So at the heart of this, it's a difference between consuming and engaging, right? We'll talk way more about that. But TikTok is mindless entertainment. Great. I think that can say that it's like an empty thing. Anyone else before? Do you have another example? Oh, okay. Here's the thing: is that like I don't want to demonize that. Like there's purposes to social media and all of that, but some of it there's not. And I'm not even talking about parts, but I mean like whole systems, right? Like Snapchat. I know that Snapchat isn't as popular with like you guys anymore. More of like maybe a middle school thing to do. That's what someone else in another class had. I actually have no idea. I've never had a Snapchat, nor have I ever engaged with it. I would be happy if that just died, but so I don't have to worry about it with my kids. But like someone gave the example earlier of like streaks. I've never heard of that before, but from her explanation of it, that is about as empty as it comes. Literally sending someone like a black image just to like keep that number going up, right? Yeah. Like, what is it that is even entertaining about that? Oh, sure, the length. Yeah. Like I was thinking about this, and I actually remember we have cousins, and there's a daughter who's like 13, 14 now. A couple years ago, gave her like Snapchat like login stuff to a friend so that she could log in and continue her streak because she was going to be on a cruise. That is normal? That is why, even in 1952, when people wrote this, it still applies today. He was just making an observation. He wasn't discovering anything. Like, that is wild that people do that. That's crazy. Okay, yeah, whatever. Anyways, Snapchat is one that immediately comes to mind. But TikTok as well. Like, have you guys ever seen, like, Christian TikTok?
It's so funny.
Bro, it's, like, so bad. Like, the desire to be really heartfelt and really significant, but in that context comes off as so flippant and tawdry and empty. It's wild. I got into, over quarantine, I have a TikTok, but I don't, like, post anything. I just, like, creep on everyone else. But I got into a Christian, like, TikTok, like, spiral, and some of the stuff is crazy. Like, girls talking about, like, you know, envisioning the husband that they're praying for, and, you know, really damaging views of, like, selfhood and womanhood and manhood and things like that. But even the ones that, like, there are a couple that I saw where it's like you're scrolling through and literally they, like, run up to the camera like, wait, stop scrolling. I'm like, what? Because what's required there is to grab your attention, right? To grab you by the collar and bring you in, rather than to have anything of substance where I desire to, like, lean in. Do you see the difference between those, right? It's like the difference between, like, a slow foreign film and, like, Fast and the Furious. Fast and the Furious, like, smacks you across the face and grabs you by the collar. Whereas, like, other films, like, the one that comes immediately to mind is the one that we'll watch probably in the spring, is Tree of Life. Like, it will not grab you by the collar at all. But it will force you to, like, lean into it because it is engaging in that way. That's visual noise. Visual noise is anything empty that we seek to consume and entertain us. But I don't even think that we seek it. It's just there. Let me give you another example. Visual noise is like the Las Vegas Strip. Like, but what we engage with, right? It is stepping foot onto the strip and then being bombarded by flashing lights, bright lights, music, the ching sound of, like, casinos. When I use the example of sirens, that's very specific. It is a siren song that is, like, calling people. We become like Scooby-Doo whenever he sees food, where we just, like, float. We just, like, lift up and then, like, we float to whatever it is. And it's not because we are seeking it in distraction. It's because it is captivating us. There's too much for us to see. There's too much for us to consume. And so we never get to think about, like, we never even get to engage with or begin thinking about these other bigger questions. So the big point is, how do we begin to, like a fog, sift through the visual noise so that we can get to a point to where we even recognize that we have this dual nature and that we're longing and things like that? That is the big question. We're going to talk about that, how we do that later on. But, spoiler, Pieper gives a really simple answer. He says, be quiet. Like, just sit still. Like Psalm 46, right? Be still and know that I am God. That. Shel Silverstein, are you guys familiar? Yes. I do too. Don't tell Wildman, because then he'll yell at you. He and I have gotten into arguments a lot about that movie. Wildman calls it a parasitic relationship. Well, I mean, it is if you take it from like a husband-wife or like boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, sure. But it's like parent-child, which then it's just like a loving story of sacrifice. But yeah, don't tell Wildman that, because then he'll get mad. Which was my exact point. But then he said probably not. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see when he has a kid. What? Yeah. It's all right. It's whatever. What did I even bring that up for? Oh, Shel Silverstein. He's a poet. And he has like Where the Sidewalk Ends and other stuff. And he has like one little 2-line poem where really all it says, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a guy sitting on a rock next to a stream. And the poem is 2 lines, and it says something along the lines of, if you ever want to get to the meaning of life, sit quietly by a stream. Pascal even talks about that, right? When Pascal says, if you want to understand what your existence is and like what you're going through, just sit quietly in a room for an hour. But we can't do that, so that's why we desire distraction and diversion and all these other things. So that's the solution, among other things, but that's the only thing we care about now. So the next problem, though, is that once we break out of that, what do we even see as like our purpose? Where do we draw meaning from? Where do we get value from? All these other things. Well, there are 2 worlds that are continually and consistently fighting for the response to that question. There's the contemporary world, which is our cultural climate, and then the real world, which I'm offering as like reality, as in like we're spiritual beings, like what my response or the Christian worldview's response would be. So, contemporary world, pleasure, convenience, and utility. Something is valuable, something has meaning if it brings me pleasure, if it is easy, or if it has a purpose. So just as an example, here, I'll wait for you guys to write that down. Yes. Utility is like if it serves a purpose. So let me offer this question. Does sitting by a stream serve like a specific like utility? Does it serve a specific purpose? Yeah, but like that's not really anything utility. Like that doesn't have a utility. It doesn't produce anything, right? Sure, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like utility in the sense of you do something because you get something out of it or you produce something, right? Sitting by a stream doesn't really do that. Well, I know, but that doesn't actually that doesn't produce anything though. What I'm saying is like have a product, right? Yes. Well, I mean that's what utilitarianism is, right? Anything that has value is something that I do that produces a product, right? So I would never just read unless I was reading for a class, or I was reading to write a paper, or I was reading, something like that. That is what utility is. Anything that has value is done for a specific reason that usually ends in a physical production, right? So sitting by a stream just doesn't fit that. Convenience, definitely not convenient because you're doing something, that's time wasted, right? Time is money. You're just wasting time sitting by a stream. Pleasure, I mean, maybe if you are fishing, whatever. But usually, contemplating and like sitting by a stream quietly is not pleasurable. For us, it might be. But think about from like this contemporary mindset. It's probably not going to be pleasurable then, because then I got to think about stuff, which is the goal for us. But it's also not for anyone who, struggles with whatever else. I won't get into that. Here's the real world purpose, where purpose and meaning come from in the real world. Engaging with my longing. Because I know that however I can do that, engaging with my longing will produce meaning, will produce value for me. Because remember, this is what we're talking about, like our anthropology. It'll produce value for me because it will help me to grow in a number of different ways. Seeing reality as it is the first step to getting to a point to where is the first step to recognizing the need for purpose in my life, the need for meaning, or the need for there being a source of meaning in my life. Visual noise muddies the water so that we don't have to worry about that. We don't even have to see it, let alone like distract ourselves. So this difference between contemporary and real world, we see perfectly in Ecclesiastes. So get out your Bibles or turn your phone apps to Ecclesiastes. So, Ecclesiastes chapters 1 through 6 is what I want you to read. And there are 3 questions. I'm just going to go through them really quickly because they're pretty self-explanatory. So Ecclesiastes is a book written by Solomon at the end of his life. Most scholars will say that his mind was deteriorating because this was after all of the concubines and wives and probably several sexually transmitted diseases. That's like a scholarly thing. I'm not saying that as like a joke. Like there are a lot of scholars that will say that his mind was deteriorating and he had like a dementia or like, the onset of something. That's why this book is so back and forth. And there's no like real flow to it. Though I think that there is, obviously. But I would disagree that whatever. Here's his point. I want you to read this and I want you to think about these questions. According to Solomon, where do we find meaning in life? Or according to Solomon, where does man attempt to find meaning in life? Number 2, where does one really and truly find meaning in life according to Koleth? Koleth is just the preacher, the teacher that is talked about in Ecclesiastes. Most people will say that it's Solomon. Some people don't. Whatever. That's not important. Then the third question is, what is the tone of Ecclesiastes? Is it happy? Is it hopeful? Is it depressing? You don't have to pick one of those 3. You can give me your own. But I just want you to give me the tone of it and then tell me why you think it is. This book is frequently understood to be slightly depressing because it's Solomon's autobiography. It's him talking about 70 to 80 years worth of experience and what it taught him. And for Solomon's life, we know he was a good king, but he was flawed. And so it's kind of sad to read. But there are lights in it. There are glimmers in it. And I think that's what I want this second question to be. So out of all of these, I would love it if you gave me like citations. So for the first one, if you're like, oh, well, we attempt to find meaning in, or find meaning in life through wisdom. That was in Ecclesiastes 2:3, Solomon says that, right? Write down those citations in your notes, because these 3 questions will come in tomorrow, and these will drive the first probably 30 to 40 minutes of our conversation, okay? Okay, any questions about this? Remember, this book, Ecclesiastes, these questions are to really help engage with the difference between these 2 things. The contemporary world and where the contemporary world derives meaning and purpose, and then where the real world derives meaning and purpose. Okay? So, you guys have the rest of the time, next 15 minutes.